It might have been the first time that you were told you couldn't do something and you said, oh, yes, I can. Or you might have stepped in as an advocate for someone, or you might have seen generational differences in your family that as a young kid you don't pay attention to. And then suddenly you realize, wow, the world I live in is different than the world. Whatever it is, it could be any kind of theme, but individual smaller stories, anecdotes. This contains huge universal wisdom. So rather than trying to write the history of the world, capture those emotionally charged, positive or negative, emotionally charged, meaningful moments of story. They have something to teach you about you and your world.
Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
And now the podcast where together we discuss proactive aging on your terms, connecting to the professional advice of our special guests while creating better days throughout the aging process. Now here's your host, Mark Turnbull.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another lively discussion on aging today. We are the podcast where together we're exploring the many options to aging on your terms. You can find Aging Today and our past 9 years of programming on our website. All you got to do is go to agingtoday.us. And then I want to say thank you for all of you that have been following over the last 9 years. It's been a privilege to walk beside you, and thank you for walking beside us as well. Well, as you know, this is a podcast about aging, and we always say that if you're not too busy being born, you're too busy aging. And we're going to be addressing the big question is, when you do get to that place where you've aged and you're at that place of retirement, what do you do with all of the vast knowledge and wisdom in your retirement? And I think it's so important to capture that. And who better to capture that than a person that is great in storytelling? And so we've invited many of you already know her. She's a past friend of the program, and she's been on Aging Today. It's Patricia Crisafulli, and she's a New York Times best-selling author, and she's a mystery novelist and a woman full of energy, knowledge, and wisdom. Patricia, welcome back to Aging Today.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, as usual, we're looking forward to having the conversation with you because you're engaging. You have such a vast depth in your pool of knowledge and wisdom, and so let's begin to draw upon that. But for those that have not had a chance to meet you, we always start out with what's in your story. What, Patricia, is in your story? What has led you to this place in your life where you've become a New York Times best-selling author, a mystery novelist, and on and it goes. And more.
Okay. Well, for me, it's my writing journey has been very consistent. It's been the dream of my heart since I was a young child. I tell this story when I was 7 years old. I had this big idea in my head, and I took a pencil and a piece of paper, and I wrote down this huge epic that had been swirling in my brain, and I got 4 whole sentences down. Clearly, at the age of 7, I didn't quite understand what it meant to capture an entire story like in an 80,000-word novel like my new one that's coming out this fall. But the journey of the writer is taking an idea, a concept, a story, a conflict, a coming together, whatever that is, and making the story out of it. Because from time immemorial, storytelling is how we humans define who we are, what matters to us, what we believe in, and where we're going. We think of the myths, we think of, sacred story, we think of indigenous stories. All these pieces of wisdom come together. And the same applies in our own lives. We have our story. So for me, my story began as a young child discovering I loved to write through school, through this, that. Became a news journalist at the local paper when I was in college and as an intern, through becoming a business journalist in New York and then Chicago. then becoming a communications consultant, which is still my day job. I work with large companies across the U.S. helping to define and convey and articulate their stories. And then in my personal creative world, writing short stories, having my Oneida Harbor mystery series, again, stories. So whether it's fact or fiction, it's something I've made up or something I'm reflecting on, story contains my truth. And I think this is valuable for anyone to look at their story to say, what is my truth? How have I explored it and expressed it? And maybe how has my perception of it changed over the years? That's wisdom.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, we all admire great storytellers. And we all admire people that can put the pen to the paper and begin to, tell that story, and so that it's memorable, it's exciting, it's riveting, it's engaging. What are some of the things that you've picked up over your life story of being a writer and learning the craft of what it takes to be that engaging?
Well, I think there's two parts. There's learning the craft and practicing the craft.
Mhm.
And the second one is the most important. So we're going to start with the second one, which is practicing the craft. If you want to write, you got to write. And we all are not very good at it in the beginning. We don't know
Mhm.
what we don't know. And then we do know what we don't know. And that's even more than we thought. So it's whether it's joining a writing group or taking a class at your community writer's studio. Many cities have these. Your library may have a writing club. Or you might be able to get together with a few friends and say, hey, let's trade pieces and give each other feedback and encouragement. Just keep writing. And as you do, you'll see where you're comfortable, where you struggle, where somebody gives you feedback like, wow, you went from I to we to they, first person, whatever it is. That's craft that you can learn. Once you
Mhm.
know what you don't know, then you can explore. I took it to the nth degree. I went back to school at 52 and got a master's in fine arts from Northwestern in creative writing. Whether it's a workshop or something as formal as an MFA program, keep learning. It engages your intellect, it keeps you fresh, puts you in community with others, and you're learning a craft. And then you practice, 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 practice.
I love the fact that you did this at the age of 52.
Yeah.
And I mean, what was going through your mind? I mean, I can think of all kinds of excuses at the age of 52 why you shouldn't be doing this. Listening to all of the naysayers out there that are saying you shouldn't be doing this and you should be retiring, or at least thinking about retiring. You should be building a nest egg. You should be building your financial empire so you can retire. And yet here you wander off at the age of 52
And
and
it
you
wasn't
take.
cheap. I mean, it was a
Yeah, yeah.
full-time, it was a program. I worked all day and I went to school at night. But here's the thing. All those things are important. We all have to work. We have to save.
Mhm.
We might be helping, younger people in our lives, save for there. We may have charities we support or volunteering that's also important, and our own careers and our businesses and whatever. So the answer is yes, all of the above. So what I found when I decided to go into the MFA, what propelled me was to reach my goal of becoming a novelist. I'd written short stories. I'd been published. I even won a couple of, minor awards for my short stories. I wanted to get to that long form fiction, that lifelong goal. And I said, my lifelong goal is worth it. So I'm going to make this investment in myself. For me personally, any kind of education at any age is so important for our minds, to see the world, to become critical thinkers and creative expressors. Education is fantastic. So I knew I was going into this for personal development, not because, I was going to, go off and make a $1 million by selling my movie script. No, I knew what I was after for craft, practice, and community. It didn't take away from those other things like working and saving, but I had to prioritize other things. I had to say, what can I give up? And you know what I gave up? I gave up a lot of time wasters, like I didn't talk on the telephone as much. I didn't watch filler television, right? Like, listen, you want to watch a good streaming? Like, that's your destination? Go for it. I streamlined my life, still worked full time, still did other things, and was able to complete this because I found I had both time and energy.
Yeah.
More than I realized. And that in itself was quite a lesson.
What would be the difference in a Patricia Crisafulli as a writer in your 20s as opposed to 52? What
Or
I mean,
now older than 52, but we're not going to put a number on that, but just say it's a few years.
but I think that, here's my point. My point is that, all of the experiences that happen in our younger years are setting the table for something fantastic in our later years.
Yes.
And so many of us in our later years dismiss everything that went on in the earlier years and saying, well, I'm done. I'm no longer useful to society. And yet at the same time, I'm going, wait a minute. This is the time when you should be bringing all of the nuggets of truth and wisdom to the table to share with the rest of us to build up the younger generations. And that's what you're doing.
Well, so a couple things. The difference for me personally in 20s to 50 and beyond was the fact of I had to gain a confidence in myself. For so many of us when we're in our 20s, it's a time of discovery, but it's also a time of feeling incredibly vulnerable and wondering, am I good enough? Am I worth it enough? Am I this enough and that enough? That can really be an impediment to expression. In addition, there are some of my fondest pieces that I wrote in my 20s that express someone seeing the world in a new way and a developing way, who goes from I saw myself as this and now I'm that. I did an essay on the first time I ever went to the developing world. I was in West Africa, and it's an essay I love, and I was 20 something when I wrote it, and it was so vulnerable because I realized how scared I was by being outside a comfort zone. Now, I've had that experience many times more now, but capturing it then was helpful. So conversely, we go to the other end of the timeline and we think of now, I have so much more to say. I can reflect on my own experiences back then through this wisdom of where I ended up. And as a fiction writer, I can also create a character. In the case of my protagonist, Gabriella, she's 44 years younger than I am. So, she and I might listen to different music. She and I might have, different experiences with what the technology she uses now and what I used in my 40s. But I know what it was like to be a single mom then, and she is then. I know what it's like to be in a relationship later as she goes through and I went through, 25 years ago. All these things add my ability to create an empathetic character. So whether it's fiction and we're looking back, or it's memoir and we're making sense of our lives, or we're looking at now, what do I have to say? It's about having a body of knowledge about the world, about our view of the world, about our time stamp in the world, certain events we read or experienced or felt in our bodies or our communities. And it's all very valuable. Each in our own way, we are witnesses to a collective history. Maybe I grew up rural and it wasn't exactly, the crossroads of dramatic change. But even there, as I look back on my early experiences, I can see the through line of change and what it means to be a person of this world and a member of society. So wherever you are, grab your story. Look back with empathy and understanding and share now, not with the fact that, oh, I earned this place, but we're learning from each other's stories because we need to be in tune with those younger emerging stories as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I find that's interesting in life is when I talk to people and I talk to people about life is a story. And not only is life a story, but your story is another story inside of that bigger story of life. How do you convey that to people? How do you take, in other words, I know you do it through your books, but when you're talking to people,
Mhm.
how do you express that?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I love to do is I love to teach and coach other writers. It's something I kind of do on the side. And there's an organization, a shout out to them out here in Eugene, Oregon called Word Crafters. And I have been one of their instructors, for a weekend conference or something. And here's what I like to say, whether it's something we've made up or it's something that we're exploring like a memory or some combination. Our stories writ small reflect a much bigger world. So one of the things I say to people is if you've got a memory that just pushes on you and it just picks at your brain, remember me, it's got something to tell you. Now, it might be, I don't know, a memory of going to the county fair, or it might be, something that happened at school. It might be this perfect little crystal of an experience. But if you poke at it a little bit and say, why is this so important? Why was this so poignant? Or why did I have all this emotion around it? It reflects the bigger world. It might have been the first time that you were told you couldn't do something and you said, oh, yes, I can. Or you might have stepped in as an advocate for someone, or you might have seen generational differences in your family that as a young kid you don't pay attention to. And then suddenly you realize, wow, the world I live in is different than the world. Whatever it is, it could be any kind of theme, but individual, smaller stories, anecdotes. This contains huge universal wisdom. So rather than trying to write the history of the world, capture those emotionally charged, positive or negative, emotionally charged, meaningful moments of story. They have something to teach you about you and your world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that teaching and the knowledge that you're passing on through your writing is to enhance and lift up other people's lives and building morale, building inspiration to, hey, maybe I can capture some of the stories. I think about my grandparents, and I used to sit around the breakfast table as a kid and listen to the stories that my grandfather would share of his experiences in the logging camps.
Oh,
Whole nother world. He used to say, Mark, today they talk about the good old days. Let me tell you firsthand, there was nothing good about the good old days. And from his perspective, he grew up at the age of 12 in a logging camp. And he would go into these, because his dad died of a heart attack, he had to help his mom, make ends meet. So he went to work in a logging camp, cutting wood to keep the stoves fired up so that when the men came in from the woods, they would take off their clothes, and then you've got all these wet clothes that are drying in these tents, and then they'd be sleeping in these bunks, and they didn't have mattresses, so they would sleep on fir boughs, and then the bed bugs would get in there. Then they'd have to soak everything in kerosene. He goes, trust me, there was nothing good about the good old days.
That's not a romantic story.
But the story was amazing. It was riveting. It was taking and transporting me back into time of what it was really like to live in that kind of an environment. And how would I respond? How would I adapt? And you just do. It's
You
part of
just
life.
do. And so another way of looking at that is to say, what I admire was this 12-year-old who just did what had to be done, a sense of loyalty, a sense of responsibility, and a resilience. So part of that could be, well, gee, I'm very grateful. So it inspires gratitude in us, right?
Yeah.
Number two, it's also a conviction that your grandfather and your parents probably had of like, I don't want my kids to have to go through this,
Yeah.
right?
Thank you.
That's our dream as parents, is we want
Yeah.
to make things easier and better for the next generation to not have to struggle and face such hardships. But at the same time, to share the stories that explain what it's like to be resilient. So whether we're facing a pandemic or the incursion of technology that feels very frightening and unsettling. We know that as humans, when we converse about our experiences, when we share our feelings, when we reach into emotional reserves, we find strength and resilience and an ability to stand up for ourselves and others, and a way to advocate that we say, well, shoot, that's what grandma and grandpa were doing during the Depression, or that's what mom and dad were talking about. It's in our DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also thinking about how you've got all these stories that have been collected by all these great individual lives. And as you know, this is a podcast about the aging process. And as we age, if you're not too busy being born, you're too busy aging and you're too busy collecting stories. And then you get to that place in your life when they say, okay, it's time for you to retire. And my biggest thing about retirement is don't retire and just do nothing, and find some outlet, find some way to continue to tell your story to the rest of the world. And sometimes that can be done through writing.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing to encourage and inspire those of us that are the boomers that are getting ready to retire, to be able to capture your stories on paper. And maybe there's a novel in there someplace.
Who knows? That's exactly right. So, first thing I say is, I hope by my example is, some people, their life journey is different. They get published very young. They get the book deal in their 30s, and off they go. My path went nonfiction first because I was a journalist. I had my first book out at 39, and then books in my 40s, etc. But fiction waited for me until I had a much different age. That was my path. So number one, writing knows no age. If just write your story, to give yourself permission. I would I've liked to have had my writing journey be different sooner, faster. Sometimes I say, well, yeah, but I go, well, wait a minute. There's certain aspects to my writing now. For example, in mysteries and creating small town characters that aren't just facing usual mystery, but there are a lot of existential questions about being an other, about belonging, about what community. That takes some experience. So first of all, own the fact that you got something to say, that you want to explore. Don't worry about the output as much as the input when you begin. I have memories, I have thoughts, I have experiences, and I want to just start to write them down. Number two, I also want to look at how I get motivated. Maybe it's a class, a writing group, a presentation at your library. Ask your librarians, hey, I want to start doing this. Do you know of a group? Chances are they know that. And then begin to talk to other folks that you know who are doing the same thing. Keep each other accountable. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to write 5 pages this week or 2 page, whatever. What are you going to do? Create community
Yeah.
because it doesn't matter where it goes. In fact, I would say if you try to say, oh, well, this novel and this novel hit the bestseller list, so I need to write this and it needs to be sci-fi. And like, no, maybe that's not you. Look at your input. Worry about that first. Find community, find a class or a group, and just begin. It is so rewarding. Over time,
Yeah.
the output will find its way.
And it doesn't necessarily have to end in a novel. It doesn't necessarily, have to, it could be just writing down your memoirs for your family to carry on. And there's so many forms and ways to be able to capture that in paper in a book form that are going on in the world today.
And there's more.
Yeah.
So yes, you could self-publish a memoir and give it to your 3 kids and your 2 nephews, your 4 nieces, and the neighbors, okay?
Yeah.
Or, you could catch the brass ring and then out it goes and you've got this thing. But there's also blogs and websites that you might go to that are, for example, there's one called 60, spelled out,
Mm-hmm.
SIXTYAND, me, 60 and me. It's for women over the age of 60. They're always looking for contributors. And a lot of it is about advice or this or that. There are a ton of websites, blogs. You might belong to a community organization that has a blog. And you're like, well, as a volunteer who does this and that, I have a story to share. So there are many little outlets where if you have a story or an experience or some advice, can find an avenue into the world that's between, making, the 3 kids read your book and having, an international book tour, a lot of things in between, but it starts with input. What do I have to put into my story machine,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And how can I stay motivated? It is not selfish. It is not a waste of time. It is not a flight of fancy. It is exploration.
Uh-huh.
It is just as important as any other kind of meditation or mindfulness or introspection that you might engage in, because stories allow us to explore the world and our place in it.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you see aging in the creative expression?
Okay, so I was thinking about this getting ready for today's conversation, and I have to say, I did have this feeling of like, ooh, aging, ooh, it's one of those words, ooh, because there can be a negative connotation, right?
Yeah.
I put on all my creams at night to reverse the aging process. My hair shouldn't be this brown, okay?
Yeah.
So we have this, but aging, think of the maturing of a crop, of a stand of beautiful trees. Think of, the rose bushes that somebody tends year over year until they more profusely bloom. Think of fine wine or good cheese or whatever else we consume. We know that aging enhances flavor and experience and joy. And aging is not becoming old and outdated and irrelevant and decrepit and what we think of as, right? It is maturing, it is developing, it is becoming fuller. For creative expression, it is so essential that we don't believe that a life is truncated at a certain age. Well, you're 37.8 years old and nothing more to say. No, at every age, there is value in whatever story we share or want to explore. So, as in a community where we are aging today, we recognize the body of our knowledge and our perspective born of many decades that allows us to see the world now afresh and anew, to be surprised, to be inspired, and also to bring the perspective of, yes, I remember what this looked like. I remember what this was like. I remember what my parents told me. I remember our generational history. We
Yeah.
bring all of that to our stories.
And
Aging
as
today creatively is a good thing.
absolutely, and as an author, your unique approach to your creativity brings another perspective to the table.
Did you know that mysteries are one of the most popular genres of all books? Patricia Crisafulli believes one of the reasons for this popularity is that mysteries engage our brains in critical thinking and creative problem solving. This Did You Know segment was brought to you by this week's guest and sponsored by Royal Hospice, Oregon.
And so talk a little bit about your style, your uniqueness as a mystery novelist, and what sets you apart in that mystery genre from other authors.
Well, I love history. So I am a mystery novelist. I don't write historical fiction. My stories are all, my Oneida Harbor mystery series is all set in the present day. But what makes me unique is there is always an artifact. It's fictional, but it's true to life, that is at the center of the story. So there's the modern day mystery and being in the kind of the cozy genre. There's a dead body in the library lawn or floating in the river. There's some murder and mayhem going on, but there's also an artifact. It is an embodiment of history. And my authenticator, main character, Gabriella, literally has to figure out what is this and where did this come from, etc. And the first novel, it was a medieval cross. And the second novel, it's a nautical schematic from the early 19th century. And the third novel, which is coming out this fall, called The Secrets of the Old Post Cemetery, it is a Revolutionary War era map. And the reason I bring these artifacts in is I want to literally bring history, past, into the present for relevance. So there is it's rare, it's cool, it's worth a lot of money factor. But
Yeah.
beyond that, everything we have.
Did you know that the
we have
RMS
that's
Queen
around
Mary,
us, whether it's a
designed to
family
carry
or the
2,139
Rembrandt,
passengers in luxury accommodations,
it has
was
really
used as a
come
troop
into
ship
the
in
world.
World War
It
II
also
and
contains
carried
a story of
16,000 soldiers
person
at a
who
time?
created it. So I try to
This
bring
Did You Know moment
that
was provided by
historic
today's guest
aspect
and is
in,
brought to you by
along with the
Royal
modern day
Hospice of
story,
Oregon.
evoking themes that are universal and timeless.
Yeah. What inspired you, though, to bring in an artifact? That's a really interesting approach. And then how did you go about choosing, because you've got 3 novels, 3 artifacts, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Okay.
how did you go about choosing those artifacts?
Well, it started with the first novel, which is The Secrets of Oneida Harbor. And the artifact there is a little tiny medieval cross. And I chose this one because I am obsessed with medieval art. I've always loved it. Don't ask me, but it's, from the 1400s and the 1500s, and it's old, and it's tends to be rare and have a lot of unusual materials in it. And I did a ton of research. In fact, it was the basis of my creative thesis at Northwestern. So for me, choosing the first artifact was pretty easy. The second novel, I wanted to choose something very different.
Okay,
so
before you get into the second one, I got to ask the question: how did that pop into your head? Like, okay, at the center of my mystery novels, I want an artifact. I mean, were you just sitting around the breakfast table one morning and go, "Oh, ding, something went on"? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I remember creating this artifact in a previous work when I was and I was washing my hair. Okay, and I maybe I was stimulating my brain, so I'm washing my hair, going, what am I going to call this thing? I said, and I was saying words out loud in the shower, and I said, the Cross of Siena. And I just said it. And was like,
Yeah.
wow, that's cool. What the heck is it? And so I invented a thing and a provenance back to Catherine of Siena, who was a woman before her time, born in like 1340, and whatever. I'm either really creative or a little cuckoo. But that's how it started. It just literally popped in my brain as I was washing my hair. And then I was like, that's my thing. I love history. I love going to museums. Again, I tapped into my real experience, and then creating a character who was an authenticator and a librarian was a natural progression. So out of my own interest came this. And then for each subsequent novel, The Secrets of Still Water's Chasm, which is environmental. I wanted to look at the deep water lakes in New York State, and explore and put a storyline around that. Therefore, coming up with something nautical. I don't want to give a spoiler. Was a natural outgrowth of some research. In the third novel, which is coming out this October, The Secrets of the Old Post Cemetery, I knew enough about the history of my hometown on the shores of Lake Ontario, my original hometown, not where I live now, that I said, oh, there's been 3 wars fought here: the French and Indian War, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812. It is steeped into this area. I'm going to create an artifact that maps this shoreline, that contains a story not only of its time, but of a bitter, bitter family rivalry. Not ours, but I mean in this fictional family.
Yeah. Yeah. And is the map, are these artifacts real?
No,
They're
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 true to
just
life,
yeah, they're true to life. They're inspired by
but
real,
they
but
exist in my head. There is
yeah.
no cross of Siena except in my
Uh,
head, and there is no schematic like there is in book 2. And this thing that I call the trader's map um, w- uh, does not exist. But there's enough truth in it historically that I can say, you will feel like it's not suddenly, this amazing glowing diamond came from outer space. No, it came out of history.
yeah. Talk a little bit about that process of, how you research um all of the facts to build this storyline, because you got to make it credible.
Right. So this is fun. So I'm going to tell you a story, because this is engaging all parts of our joy and our interests and our sense of adventure. Right. So, and if you're going to write a story, go do this. Whether you're looking literally going back to the old family farm, which has been sold, and you're looking at the fence posts and where they came to, whatever, do it. Go into the field, do the research, look at the photo albums, talk to it's part of the joy. So for me, I'm creating a 14th century cross about this tall and about this wide, tiny, and it has some structural flaws, all of which. What did it look like? Oil has to be gold with jewels. No, that's a cliche.
Yeah.
Well, then I found out that they didn't start to facet jewels the way we think of in our jewelry now until about the 1600s. So there went that. Before, a jewel was a cabochon cut, flat with a rounded top. How did I know that? I went to a museum. I spoke to one of their gemologists. So you can have that job title apparently in some places. Explained that to me, but I still wasn't convinced that it should be precious metal because it feels like everything else. I went to a museum in New York City on a business trip to the Morgan Library, and I went through a wonderful display on Emily Dickinson, nothing to do with my novel, and I was putting on my coat on a very cold day, and I dropped my gloves. So I bent down to pick up my gloves, and when I raised up, I came eye to eye with a display I had not seen of a chalice from 14th century Siena that was covered in enamel, something called basse-taille enameling, which was perfected in Italy in around the 13th century.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, now I know what this looks like. It's got precious metal, it's got the low relief carving, it's got boss tie enameling. It came to life for me through this research, which it happened because I dropped my gloves in the
Yeah.
lobby of the museum.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I mean by engaging in the adventure. It's a
Mhm.
great story for me, and it also shows that we are living out the mysteries of our own lives.
I'm still trying to picture how they had attached jewelry to whether it was a cross or whether it was any kind of a chalice, whatever. So did they use a glue or
No. Okay.
so,
So,
so
with
I'm a
best
little
tie.
confused with that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So, I mean, so we know what it looks like when we set a jewel into a ring.
Yeah.
There's got little facets. So
Right.
if you look at some medieval art that's got those cabochon jewels, there's a depression around it. The jewel set in and
Sits
then
in.
it's crimped in. This is something that's enameled. It looks like little tiles that are or like little mini stained glass windows. So what they would do is they would have their shape like a chalice or cross, a pendant or something. There'd
Mhm.
be carving, low relief. So it would be 3D, right? But it wouldn't. And in that, so you'd have like if you had somebody's face, their nose would stick out, their eyes would be in, their hair.
Mhm.
It would be carved in, and then they would apply layers of translucent colored enamel that would make the garment blue and the hair brown and the
Hmm.
wrap red. And it looked like a little stained glass window. So carving
Yeah.
and then layers of enamel that built up this gorgeous image. I will send you a link to the Chalice of St. Michael's Abbey from the Morgan Library that you can either put in the show notes or at least you yourself will be able
Yeah.
to see this. It will just blow your mind.
Yeah. Do you have that on your website?
I don't, but they have it on their website and I can
Yeah.
share that with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Well, I mean, these are the kind of the fascinating things that's the story behind the story.
And this is what we're going to all engage in as we tell
Yeah.
our stories. Now, you might say, well, that's fine for her, but my gosh, that exhausts me. But maybe you want to write about, memories of how your mom and your grandma made preserves every fall. And that's
Mhm.
a childhood memory. Well, you're going to have to figure out, wait a minute, did they use a canner? Was it enamel? You're going to look at pictures.
Yeah.
In engaging in those things, and when you pick them up, or maybe you have that, you realize there's a story in this thing that I didn't fully appreciate before because touching it, looking at it,
Yeah.
I'm recalling something I heard 40 years ago or longer that I'd forgotten about.
Yep. Yep. It does it. By telling that or digging in and finding out how this was
Literally
all
digging
put.
in.
Yeah. Then it opens up a whole new genre inside your mind. And it also brings forth the smells.
Yes, smell is very evocative.
Yeah. Touches and all the things that go into that.
And that joy, that discovery, I think it really increases our mental capacity to take things in because we're becoming mindful in the moment about a time. We're not just like, oh, I call it squirrel brain. Oh, I got to do this and I got to go here. It's like, I am focused on this thing.
Yeah.
I'm listening to someone explain to me how this was used or where it was. I'm looking at a map. I'm looking at these photographs. I'm sharing this. And it's going deep, not broad.
Yeah, I want to get back to your mystery novel that's coming out in October, and I don't know how much you can share, without spilling too
Love
much.
to talk about it.
But okay, let's get back to this map. So this map was a map from what era again? It was this.
So, I have a memory, which might be a false memory, of being told something when I was like in 4th or 5th grade, maybe 6th grade, about somebody created a spy map for the British of the shoreline that showed the swamps and some areas where the Continental Army kept their boats and their supplies or whatever. And the person who made the map made it purposefully inaccurate. So I had this memory. Well, guess what? All the research in the world never turned this up. So I was like, maybe I made it up. Maybe I don't know. But I loved this idea of a map of a place that is inaccurate for reasons we can't quite understand, but like notoriously inaccurate. Like if you looked at it, you'd be like, I can't use this, right? So I know my shoreline. I have fictionalized the area. I give it different names. I put a few features on there. And then I went to a cartographer I met out here in Oregon, and I said, if I give you a sketch, could you make a map for me? And he said, I would love to. So shout out to Dave Imus, IMUS, and his Imus Geographics is his website. And he made a map for me that I can then put in the book so you can see. It's very simple. It isn't this gorgeous, beautiful map. It's a quickly hand-sketched map the way it would have been done back then. It captures a place, but the inaccuracies tell the story of why someone would change the way a place looks. And I don't want to say too much about that, but as Gabriella herself is an authenticator and is a librarian and as an adjunct in the history department at the local college tells her students, each of these things has a story waiting to be told. It is as if the object itself wants to tell you what it means. And I like that as a story element, and I also like it as metaphor for ourselves. There is more to us than meets the eye. We have an abundance of experiences and perspectives and rises and falls and all that. And in all of that, what we present to the world is a topography of our lives. But maybe some of the faults and the flaws and the inaccuracies are really what make us interesting.
Excellent. Well said. So when someone reads your mystery novels, what do you hope that they will walk away with?
Well, I mean, the obvious is that I hope that they're entertained. And I really hope that they see that there's a lot going on in this third one, The Secrets of the Old Post Cemetery. We got a modern day murder mystery. I mean, we got murders and we got crime and we got all kinds of stuff going on. And then there's this historic context of something that happened during the revolution. And we have this going on. So we got a couple of tiers. You got to pay attention. So I hope that that's going on. But there's something about mysteries in general that I think are very important. I mean, they're a very popular genre. We all like to be smarter than Poirot or Inspector Gamache in Louise Penny's wonderful novels. We want to solve the crime along with that person, that expert. It engages our minds, our critical thinking. Like we got to connect the dots. And we know the author is going to send us over here and it's going to be a red herring and we're going to be off on a tangent and whatever. But we connect the dots. And I think this is a wonderful skill in our own lives because there are going to be situations in daily life where we have a problem to solve or we have a mystery to figure out. Or it may be something grand and exciting, or it could be something as like I couldn't figure out why the air vent in my bathroom kept dripping water on my head every time I combed my hair. Where was the condensation coming from? Not very exciting, right?
Yeah.
But we have we connect dots. And the more we can do that in a story and be entertained, our brain starts to see patterns that tells us even the most difficult problems can be addressed. Even the most intractable mysteries can be solved. There is a solution. We just have to stick with it and wait for the next clue
Yeah.
and the next one and the next one.
And in the aging process, as our brains become less active, because of what we choose to do with our lives, reading can play such a huge role in exactly stimulating the mind and keeping the paths clear. And I love the way you described how we connect the dots. And that's exactly what our brains need to continue to do in our latter years.
Right. And there might be ways of taking that skill if you're someone who's very good at this problem solving. Maybe you get up on a group at the local community center or a park or something that says that we have a project here we're trying to solve, and you can bring your critical thinking and your creativity there and say, I have life experience, I have these things, and I got a brain that loves puzzles and that can figure things out. And I want to be part of this team. And suddenly we find that there's an outlet for all that we have to give.
And you call this the second act.
Second act, third act, in my case, I think. I don't know. I may have an 8-act play going on here, but we're not done,
Yeah.
On the occasion of my 35th birthday a while ago, I called up my dad, who then would have been 76. And I said, oh, Dad, I turned 35. And he said, well, consider the alternative to not turning 35. And that sobered me up. And so I said to him, he was 41 years older than me. I'm like, Dad, what's the secret? And with my father, it was always the wisdom of what he didn't say as well as what he did say. He said, well, if you're alive, you better be living. And he didn't say anything about this and that, but this very simple thing. If you are alive, you better be living. And I think that's great advice for every age. If you have the gift of life, if you are up and your eyes are open and you're looking at this world and you have a pulse and a way to breathe in and out, and you can be present in your life, then be living for whatever that appears to be for you. It's a blessing and a gift.
Oh, well said. And I was going to ask the question, what advice would you give to people that are looking at that second act? And I think you answered it right there.
I would quote my dear old dad. If you're alive, you better be living.
What a great place to end our conversation. And if others that are listening want to learn more about your craft, the way you write and the novels that you put together, what's your website?
Okay. Best way to find me and my novels and things. I mean, first of all, I'm on the usual places wherever they sell books, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, and all that good stuff. Put in my name, they'll pop up. My website is called Faith, Faith, Hope, Hope, and And, Fiction, Fiction.com. The faith part is not, tenets of the whatever. It is faith in ourselves, the leap of faith, inspiration, most broadly defined. Hope. Why hope? Because without hope, we can't get ourselves out of bed, let alone create anything. Fiction. Why fiction? Because I believe that even in made-up stories, there is deep truth. So faithhopeandfiction.com is where you'll find me, my creative path, more about my books, and more about writers who I engage with and also publish on my website.
And on your website, the one thing I appreciated is that you have a lot of short stories or a lot of different things.
All short stories.
Yeah.
Short stories, essays, and poems. Right. Exactly. And there's by the way, it's my labor of love. So even though I publish other people, there's no ads, there's no registration. You can sign up for my newsletter if you want. And if you don't, you can just come back. There's no impediment between the story and you, because that's one of my values. I'm blessed to be able to do this and fund it through my other work because I wanted faithhopeandfiction.com to be an oasis on the web, like your wonderful podcast, where information and inspiration is available just for asking.
Okay, so if somebody is listening right now and they are inspired by your life's work, and the way you write, and they want to explore that, is Is there something on your website that they can get in contact with you to kind of get some guidance?
Sure. There's a contact Trisha page,
Uh-huh.
and somebody could send me an email through there.
Because you mentioned something about a 60s, what was that?
60 and Me. That just happens
60.
to be a place where I've blogged. So number one, if somebody wants to know, send me an email through my website. I will reply. Number two, ask your local wherever you live, your local librarian for help finding a writer's group, a book discussion group, a group where you can physically meet with other people. I mean, Zoom is lovely. We do this. We love this. We can be anywhere. But there's something that's special. Like I teach at Word Crafters here in Eugene, Oregon. There is a group. There's a place where you can go to learn more, be in community. Start with your local library. Do you know of a writer's group? Do you know of a reader's group? I want to explore more. And it'll be the best gift you ever gave yourself.
Amen to that. And Patricia Crisafulli, thank you so much for being on Aging Today. And I can't wait for your new book to come out in October.
Well, I might have to come back then to talk about it.
Yeah, and we got to learn all about this map. And I like the deception in the map where it's not a real map. It's you're trying to fool the enemy. So
no, it's a fictionalized map of a map that was a hoax, that was a ruse, that was a
yeah. but all based in some kind of historical
all based
context.
In historic probability.
I love that. Love that. It's very exciting. All right. Well, thanks once again for being on Aging Today.
Thank you.
All right. This is Mark Turnbull, your host, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Aging Today. We are the podcast where together we're exploring the many options to aging on your terms. You can join us every Monday when we release a new conversation and on the aging process and to your favorite podcast channel. And remember this, we're all in the process of aging, and as we age, we really are better together. So stay young at heart.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung. And every time I see your face, I'm such a happy individual. The moment that you speak, I want to go play hide and seek. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a toy balloon. Well, you and I are just like a couple of tots running across the meadow, picking up lots of forget-me-nots. So you made me feel so young. You made me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be flung. And even when I'm old and gray.
You've been listening to Aging Today, where together we explore the options to aging on your terms. Join Mark and his guest next week for another lively discussion on proactively aging on your terms, connecting you to the professional advice of his special guests, with the goal of creating better days throughout the aging process. Your host has been Mark Turnbull. Join Mark and his guests every week on Aging Today, your podcast to exploring your options for aging on your terms.
And even when I'm old and gray, you make me feel the way I feel today. 'Cause you make me feel so. You make me feel so. You make me feel so young. So young. You make me feel so young. You make me feel so young.